The genetics of sin. Romans chapter 5 and verse 19. Or another title could be the biological understanding of sin, commonly referred to as original sin or inherited sin, which is not a crime but a misfortune. Let's begin this study. We'll have an opening reading from the Bible in Romans chapter 5 and verse 19 from the literal standard version. For as through the disobedience of the one man, the many were constituted sinners, so also through the obedience of the one will the many be constituted righteous. So before we explain what is a constituted sinner, we'll have a look at what does the word sin mean. And we're not going to be turning to an English dictionary for our understanding. We're going to be looking at an Hebrew understanding and a Greek understanding. So the Greek noun, which is translated sin, has been used since the days of Homer, and tracing the evolution of the use of the term up through Aristotle shows three main categories of meaning. First is the original literal sense, commonly translated into English as miss, meaning physically to miss something, to fall short or to go astray of a goal or target. Homer used the word frequently in battle scenes to conjure images of hitting or missing intended targets. And we can see this meaning from the book of Judges, chapter 20 and verse 16. Among all these soldiers there were 700 select left-handers, each of whom could sling a stone at an air without missing. So the words translated without missing is the Hebrew word for sin. Here the word is used physically for shooting an arrow or throwing a stone through the air and not missing the target. Again, another translation of that same verse reads, among all this people there were 700 chosen men, left-handed, every one could sling stones at an air breath and not miss. So it's interesting to see how the Hebrew word used in this verse, which is translated as miss or not miss, aligns with the original literal sense of the Greek term miss or falling short. So the word sin has two principal acceptations. So what this means, basically, two principal acceptations, it means that the word sin is basically used in two major ways within the scriptures. Sin, in its most comprehensive definition, is to miss the mark, whether morally, transgression, or physically. Mankind was initially created with the intention of sharing in God's glory, both physically and morally. Mankind has missed the mark, both physically and morally, due to the events in Eden. We are created in the womb in that fallen state and thus born in sin. Therefore, sin has two major meanings, two principal acceptations: the transgression of the law, next, that physical element of the animal nature which causes all diseases, death, and resolution into dust. So with this understanding of sin being physical, we can now understand the expressions the sin in the flesh, the sin in my members, the law of sin and death, the sin that dwells in me, the sin that brings forth death, the body of sin, etc., etc. The origin of sin. How did sin enter the world? Genesis chapter 2 and verse 16. And the Lord God commanded the man, You are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat from it, you will certainly die. In Genesis chapter 3 and verse 17, to Adam he said, Because you listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you. Through painful toil you will eat food from it all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. And then Paul gives us a commentary about this in Romans chapter 5 and verse 12. Because of this, even as through one man sin entered into the world, and through sin death, thus to all men death passed through, for that all sinned. The constitution of sin. Romans chapter 5 and verse 19. For as through the disobedience of the one man the many were constituted sinners, so also through the obedience of the one will the many be constituted righteous. That is to say, the one man, Adam, disobeyed God and became a sinner. As a consequence, all his offspring inherited sin from him, even before becoming actual transgressors or sinners. In that way, many were constituted sinners. This constitution is elsewhere termed sinful flesh or sin's flesh, that is, flesh under the dominion of a sinful constitution and therefore subject to death. See Romans chapter 6 and verse 9 and Romans chapter 8 and verse 3. However, by the obedience of the one man, Jesus Christ, to God, the means were provided for many to be constituted righteous. Sin is hereditary. Adam broke God's law and was judged unworthy of immortality and sentenced to return to the ground from whence he was taken, a sentence which defiled and became a physical law of his being and was transmitted to all his posterity, including Jesus. So how was sin transmitted to all his posterity? Through the flesh. See Psalm 51 and verse 5. Behold, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. So sin would be rooted within our DNA. Yes, sin is hereditary. It is part of our genetic structure. You could say it's programmed into our DNA. Most scientists agree that aging and death seem somehow programmed into our genes. The question is, when, how and why did they enter our genetic code, as it were? The Bible gives us the simple answer, even though it does not present it in terms of genetics or DNA. Romans chapter 5 and verse 12 reads, That is why, just as through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men, because they had all sinned. If sin brings forth death, or has the power of death, Hebrews chapter 2 and verse 14, the diabolos being an equivalent expression for sin, this would make sin a physical law of decay. Note, the devil or the diabolos is not a supernatural being, but a personification of human nature, abstract transgressions and concrete sin in the flesh, manifested in individuals and collectively in the organizations and institutions of this present order of things. So yes, sin is a physical law of decay. See 1 Corinthians chapter 15 verses 53 to 54. The Greek word translated corruption means decay. This corruptible body must put on incorruption, so that the body of sin, Romans chapter 6 and verse 6, might be done away with. So you want to look up that the word corruption means decay. Go to Strong's Concordance and in the Greek look up 5349 and then compare that with 5351, and there you go. The word corruptible means decay, the physical law of decay, cellular decay. Sin is a physical law related to the decay and corruption of the body. Sin, that physical element of the animal nature which causes all diseases, death, and resolution into dust. In this sense, sin is seen as both physical and symbolic of cellular decay within the body. Sin causes physical deterioration of the human body over time. Sin is viewed as a physical phenomenon rooted in the human body and brain. Where in the flesh does sin emanate from? Sin emanates from brain flesh. See Romans chapter 8. For the mind of the flesh is death, and the mind of the spirit is life and peace, because the mind of the flesh is hostility to God, for to the law of God it does not subject itself. The mind of the flesh, or the thinking of the flesh, is the brain. Emanating from the brain, physical, it, indwelling sin, excites the propensities, and these set the intellect, mental, and the sentiments, moral, to work. The propensities are blind, and so are the intellect and sentiments in a purely natural state. When, therefore, the latter operate under the sole impulse of the propensities, the understanding is darkened through the ignorance because of the hardness of the heart. Mark chapter 7 and verse 21 to 23. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed evil thoughts, adulteries, fornications, murders, thefts, covetousness, wickedness, deceit, lewdness, an evil eye, blasphemy, pride, foolishness. All these evils come from within and defile a man. Sin originates within the human heart, which is symbolic of the mind. The mind is thinking produced by the brain. The dictionary says brain, that part of the central nervous system that includes all the higher nervous centers enclosed within the skull. In other words, it is the physical member of the body that controls the biological functions of the body, in addition to producing thoughts, attitudes, etc. Mind. the element of a person that enables them to be aware of the world and their experiences, to think and to feel, the faculty of consciousness and thought. Thus, the mind is thinking produced by the brain. Sin is biological, so sin would be a biochemical impulse produced by the brain. Yes, it is a biochemical reaction produced by the brain, so sin is physical, biological. Yes, sin is physical, biological, because it is a thinking and feeling produced by the brain. Mental states are actually only physical states, are they not? I mean, the brain is just a chemical supercomputer. What are thoughts made of? They're really just electro-chemical reactions. It is generally accepted that the basic components of emotion pertain to brain and body states generated by neurological impulses and the cellular release of biochemical substances. Like it or not, emotions share some very real biochemical links with your nervous system, immune system, and digestive system. Consciousness is the property of the brain, and the brain is a biochemical engine, or it's just a chemical supercomputer. Sin is transmitted to all human beings through Adam, our biological ancestor. It is considered to be rooted within our DNA as a result of Adam's disobedience. The concept of sin being written into our DNA is a metaphorical expression to describe its hereditary nature. Sin emanates from the flesh, specifically the brain. The brain is considered the thinking substance or the seat of the propensities that lead to sinful thoughts, desires and actions. Sin's influence on human nature is believed to affect the mind, emotions and moral inclinations, which are interconnected with the physical brain. Therefore, according to this perspective, sin is understood to have a physical manifestation in the flesh, specifically within the brain, and is transmitted through the biological lineage from Adam to all humanity. The understanding that thoughts are electrochemical reactions and emotions are associated with brain and body states generated by neurological impulses and the release of biochemical substances can be used to explain the physical nature of sin. According to this perspective, sin can be seen as a product of the physical process occurring within the human body, particularly the brain. Thoughts, being electrochemical reactions, arise from the intricate workings of neurons, neurotransmitters, and electrical signals. Sinful thoughts in this context would be a result of specific patterns and interactions of these electrochemical reactions in the brain. Emotions, on the other hand, are influenced by the interplay of neurological impulses and the release of biochemical substances. The brain and body states associated with emotions can affect one's disposition and actions. In the case of sin, it can be argued that certain emotional states, driven by the release of specific biochemical substances, may lead individuals to engage in behaviors that go against moral or ethical standards. The law of sin and death. the concept of the law and sin and death, which suggests that sin leads to physical decay and death. This implies that sin has tangible consequences on the physical well-being of individuals, supporting the notion that sin being a physical phenomenon. Decay and cellular impact. Sin is described as a physical law of decay within the human body. This corruptible nature of the human body, subject to sin, leads to deterioration and ultimately death. This further emphasizes the physical aspect of sin and its effects on the body's cellular processes.